Hi friends, Russ Barkley here, and I have another commentary on ADHD. What a surprise. Today I want to talk about a trend that I've noticed appearing in the trade media about adult ADHD that I am going to try to address, and that is this concept that masking occurs more in people with ADHD than typical people, though it may not occur more than in people on the autism spectrum, which is where this term actually seems to have originated. But it appears that on Reddit, on TikTok, and in the trade media, there's an awful lot of discussion about this as if this was a proven fact. So let's take a quick look at what's out there. I'm only pulling a few examples, by the way. That's not to say that these websites are bad. It's to simply illustrate the concept is out there. So here we're over at the website for I'm Busy Being Awesome, and it's talking about masking. And it's also not only talking about it as if it occurs in adults with ADHD more than others, but it also describes masking as if it was a negative thing to be doing, that it's going to lead to other harms if people continue to do this. So what is masking? Well, according to this website and many others, masking is when you behave in ways that are contrary to your authentic self, how you otherwise feel as if you would like to behave. So you're putting on a public persona or aura that you don't believe is especially true to your inner authentic self, how you otherwise would choose to behave. And so the website here talks about how exhausting this is for adults with ADHD. It probably is. And that you shouldn't be doing this, that it's not necessary, that you're busy being your awesome and authentic self, and that's enough. You shouldn't do these things because, as it says later on this website, this can lead to all kinds of problems, such as anxiety, low self-esteem, depression, exhaustion, and other difficulties that people believe may arise from trying to mask your authentic self. Let's take a look at another website here. As I said, I don't mean to selectively pick on these websites. There are many other websites I could have chosen that are discussing this. This is a very well mined, and it also talks about masking or the camouflaging of your symptoms. And again, it presents this as something people with ADHD do more than others. And it also presents this as if it was something harmful to do. Now, my problem with this particular website, and I'll just briefly mention it, is they talk about the fact that I have discussed this in my books, particularly in Taking Charge of Adult ADHD. I don't think so. I went back and even looked at the book, and I don't mention masking anywhere. I do talk about the fact that adults with ADHD in the workplace, or sometimes in social situations, do find it exhausting, more effortful to try to behave in ways that they're expected to behave, to try to get their work done, to try to manage time, to try to be organized, to try to get along with other people, that it may take more effort for them. And by the end of the day, they may well feel more exhausted at having to perform up to typical levels or expectations in the natural environment. But I didn't present that as a negative thing, just as a description we hear from many adults with ADHD. So not quite clear where the author got this impression. I'll dig further into the book to see if I might be wrong, but I don't think so since I wrote the book. And there's also some other factual errors. They cite this as a 2015 book. It's actually the first edition from 2010 of my book, but that's beside the point. The point here is that it presents masking as something more common in adults with ADHD, though at least here the author admits that there's no research supporting that idea. It's simply one that has developed a life of its own within the adult ADHD community and certainly within a variety of clinicians who are writing on the trade media. So they give examples of masking, such as staying too quiet and being overly careful about what you say to avoid talking too much or interrupting people. By the way, thank you for trying to do that. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Obsessively checking your possessions and belongings to make sure that you haven't lost anything. Well, given that you have a propensity for losing things, is this a bad thing for you to be doing? Is to double check your possessions more often? Reacting as if you are expected to during class, as if you're expected to be doing things during class instead of how you feel on the inside. I don't think we want you acting publicly how you feel on the inside, and so on. Hiding your hyperactivity through trying to be calm and trying to suppress your fidgeting and foot tapping. I'd call that a coping strategy. Indeed, don't we try to teach adults with ADHD coping strategies? Is teaching an adult with ADHD to make a do list at work so that they stay more organized for that day? Is that masking? Are you being inauthentic to your disorganized self? Is this going to produce bad results to you in the sense that you're going to be more anxious, have low self-esteem because you can't be disorganized when you want to be, because we're trying to teach you how to cope with your disorganization and reduce it so that you can perform your job better and so forth. Do you see what I mean? I mean, you can take these forms of masking and translate them into healthy coping skills to try to use in public so that you don't lose friends and your job and your marriage and other consequences that might accrue if you act according to your authentic self. Here it talks about bottling up intense emotions until you feel sick inside without letting these emotions go. Again, as if letting your emotions go is a good thing in public? I don't think so. Emotional dysregulation is the first and best predictor of how many friends you're going to have across your life. So should you be blasting people? Should you be releasing your inner atypical emotions on them just because that's your authentic self? I think you might want to double check that at the door and rethink that strategy, because you're going to wind up without a lot of social relationships. Now, let's take another one. Attitude Magazine also has an article on masking. Here, presenting it as a fait accompli. This is bad. This is a form of self-sabotage. When in fact, as we've said, it may just be trying to cope in public with your symptoms. Again, is that a bad thing? And they're saying that it's going to produce shame and stigma and so on if you try to do this. So, and they give a lot of examples of what masking looks like as well. We're not going to waste any more time on those examples. Suffice to say that it simply means hiding your authentic self in order to present behaviors and appearances that are more socially acceptable to the neurotypical world. So, well, let's just say there's absolutely no research on this. I found only 2 articles when I searched the journals, neither one of which is a study. One of them is simply an interview with 6 medical students that had ADHD. They do talk about trying to mask their symptoms so that they can perform better when they're in the workplace, and that this can be exhausting. Both of those are probably true, but again, it doesn't present this necessarily as a negative thing, although a few of the medical students wish they could behave more authentically in medical school. My guess is that you would be asked to leave if you do that, or that your grades are certainly going to suffer. There was one study comparing adults with autism to adults with ADHD and typical adults on some rating scales, one of which is a rating scale of camouflaging autistic traits known as the CAT-Q. And this was done over in the Netherlands. And what they found is that adults with autism engaged in more camouflage than adults with ADHD, who did this less than the adults on the spectrum, but more than typical adults. The only problem with this study, and it kind of boggles my mind, is that The rating scale measures masking of autistic symptoms. Well, since people with ADHD have less of those symptoms, and people with more neurotypical behavior have even less of those symptoms, you could have predicted this result. It did not assess masking of ADHD symptoms in the adults with ADHD, but masking of autistic symptoms. Again, doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we know that the rating scale only measures autism symptoms and whether or not the person tried to mask them. So again, a not very informative study, certainly not very methodologically sound, and its results could be predicted from the rating scale that was used. So there you have it. Masking is out there. It's apparently said to be common in adults with ADHD, and apparently it's supposed to be a bad thing. So let's take a look at a few things that we can say about this phenomenon of masking and ADHD. Let's understand this. Masking is typical of most people when they are in the presence of others. We want to thank you for not belching out loud or passing gas audibly or wearing your slovenly workout clothes that you might have done during the lockdown or on Saturdays when you're at home. We really appreciate you suppressing that authentic self when you are out in public. And the same applies to suppressing your strong emotions, your excessive talking, your propensity for dominating conversations if you have adult ADHD, your penchant for distractibility while you're driving, and so on. Those are things we would like you to strive to cope with if that is possible and compensate for, because that's what we're trying to teach during cognitive behavioral therapy. So that kind of masking is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And most people do it. It's not just people who are neurodivergent who are engaging in this kind of presenting oneself publicly while having another set of behaviors, appearances, and expectations when we are alone or in private. It's just what we do. Trying to maintain a socially acceptable appearance and set of actions is commonplace. There is no evidence that adults with ADHD engage in masking any more than do neurotypical people. While masking may be more effortful and exhausting for those with ADHD than typical people, that is no reason to abandon doing so. Because, as I said, one person's masking is another person's coping strategies. And maybe those are good things to be doing. There is not a shred of evidence that engaging in this kind of masking or camouflaging is detrimental to people. After all, we all do it, even neurotypical people. And, as I said, we thank you for not being so authentic publicly in the presence of us and others, because if you choose to act that way by displaying your awesome and authentic self, I see that as a recipe for social and occupational disaster. So, thank you so much for joining me this week for this commentary. I hope you found it informative. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And as always, be well. Thanks, everybody.